talking to Carolyn, and she can ask any questions she wants.
And she gets our full attention. Y'all see my screen all right?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So today we're going to be talking about the graduate admissions application materials. These are the typical components you're going to find within a graduate school application. So they're basically going to entail what requirements each program is going to ask of you. Some of the common ones that are found in most applications, though some applications might vary. There's, of course, you have to pay for them, but there are ways to get out of paying those fees and tips for organizing your application materials. Because if you don't organize it properly, you can have mishaps where you say send the wrong application to the wrong school, and that already looks bad. So first, let's start off by talking about the requirements of each program. So unfortunately, they're going to have their own requirements. There's some of them are going to be similar to each other's, but they're going to vary based on school and even discipline or department. So, and they also have their own deadlines. So most of them will end sometime in December. However, there's some deadlines that go all the way to January or even like late spring. Again, it all depends. So here I have an example of the physics graduate program FAQ asking, what's the deadline for the application? You can see here that they have January 15th. They also show you how many students they accept annually and how much teaching assistantships they grant per year. So be sure to tailor each application to each program. I know it seems easy to just send a blanket application or stuff like that, but unfortunately with grad school, there's no common app like there is with undergraduate applications. And if something confuses you, they might have something in their FAQ, but I would recommend reaching out and talking to some of the admissions officers because they would be able to give you up-to-date information. So general scenario for a typical graduating undergraduate looking to apply for graduate school, you're looking towards applying maybe to 5 to 10 programs tops. Or you can apply to more. That's just on average. That's how many people apply to. I know I applied to 6 or 7. So some of the basic components you'll find is a web-based application. This is where you're going to upload your basic information, your documents, and where you're going to ultimately submit your applications. This is sort of like the vessel that contains everything that will be sent to the admissions people. There's going to be some essays. It might be one essay, it might be multiple, and we'll cover what type of essays you might have to submit. You're, of course, going to ask transcripts. They might specify unofficial or official. If it doesn't say, reach out and ask. They might also ask GRE scores. This, however, is still a little bit up in the air because there's been this recent movement of a lot of programs sort of dropping the GRE score requirement, but some programs are still keeping it. And in fact, some departments will require GRE subject scores. I know for physics, they definitely require some departments, they want the physics GRE score. So something to look out for. They might specify resume or CV, coursework history, and letters of recommendation. And on top of this, they might have specific requirements. So let's talk about one of the essays you might encounter. So this is one type of essay known as the statement of purpose. So this is what essentially this is you are trying to convince the admissions panel that you will succeed in their graduate program, because in the United States, as we mentioned previously, in some of our previous meetings, they pay you in STEM, they pay you to get a PhD. They cover your tuition, they waive it, and they'll pay you a stipend so you can live, quote unquote, live on. And that depends on universities and areas that you live in. So they're basically making an investment in you, and you are trying to convince them to invest in you. So it'll typically be like a prompt you might have to answer. And the typical structure is you introduce yourself, interests, motivations, summarize your experiences that are relevant, whether that be, and that could include research, extracurricular, discuss how the relevance of your current or recent endeavors. You might want to elaborate your interest in their program and why you're a good fit for their program, and any future goals you might have and how their program can help you attain those goals. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too deep into this example, but this is one example I got. This is my statement of purpose I sent to Rice University, the physics department, and I got accepted into their program. So just want to be sure that I give you a statement of purpose that has indeed been proven to work. So just going to pause it for a few seconds. If you're going to watch the recording, you can pause it and read through it, but it basically follows the structure that I described. Okay, moving on. So sometimes they might ask for a personal statement. So statement of purpose and personal statement are different. They do have some similarities, but the personal statement is more oriented about yourself. This is where you're allowed to get more personal in your essay, and they also might provide a prompt. You might use an experience relevant to your professional goals. This might be undergraduate outreach or becoming a researcher. This is where you would highlight your character, your achievements, who you are as a person. However, you must be sure that the statement remains relevant to the program. So the difference between like a statement of purpose and like a personal statement is a personal statement, like the name implies, is where you are allowed to start highlighting your character, who you are as a person, that sort of thing. Whereas a statement of purpose is a sort of like has some of the similar things, but you're also trying to highlight some of your professional experiences and convince them why you're a good fit for their program. So this is one of the personal statements from one of our chapter president, Larissa. Again, we're not going to go into it too much detail, break it down because of the interest of time. So I will pause for a few seconds if you want to read it while watching the recording. Now, the other type of essay they might ask you is a research statement. So this is another type of essay that differs from personal and statement of purpose. There are similarities between statement of purpose and research statement. You could think of like a statement of purpose as a combination of personal and research put together, and personal research being like separate from that. But there are some differences in the sense that a research statement is where they're solely asking you to talk about your research experience. Which is important because if you're going into a STEM PhD program or say like a master's program, you are probably going to be expected to do research. So having experience is a good sign that you are going to be able to do research in their institution. So unfortunately, not everyone has the privilege of getting research experience or getting enough research experience. So we've sort of divided things up into two different categories. So what to do if you have research experience? Well, it's pretty simple. You talk about your projects, give a brief background. What was the research question? Methods, what did you learn? Your skills, some results, contributions that you've made in the research. Were there any papers or presentations made? What did you learn from those experiences? That's what you would do that's what you would write if you have research experience. Now, let's consider the case if you don't have research experience. So you could still write something. However, you would have to basically talk about your interests. You're going to have to do a little bit of literature reading to sort of get an understanding of what you're interested in and make sure that the institution that you're applying to has that research interest that you're looking into. And same for the research experience part. If you haven't, you have to make sure that the institution has the research area or a professor that is doing something that you want to do and have described in your research statement. But back to if you don't have a research experience, this is where you have the opportunity to basically formulate a research question. If you don't know how to do that, feel free to ask us. we'd be happy to go help. Talk about design, experiments, methods, your hypothesis, reference literature, and how the future institution will aid you in in answering your research question, So even if you don't have research experience, you can still write this research statement and still have a shot at getting into a PhD program or a master's one. And here again is Larissa's. It's her research statement that she has it here. I'll pause for a few seconds so you can stop the video. Now, next part of your application, letters of recommendation. So this is another key critical component of your application, in a sense that this is where people who know you are going to talk about you and are going to try to convince the admissions people that you are worthy of investment, and they have to be people who can speak on your character, your ability to conduct research, achievements you might have had in your academic career, your strengths as an applicant, and this is also where they can address any shortcomings that you might have. So let's say that you just had a rough time, something personal happened, and it was like and it took some time away from your studies and your grades suffered because of it. A professor can speak up on that, sort of addressing that, because, stuff happens. And I typically sometimes advise people to, talking to your letter writers on maybe using their letters to address these shortcomings, because I know a lot of people try to address their shortcomings in their essays and their personal and their statement of purpose, but sometimes you're limited by space, because these admissions people have so much to read, so they limit how much you can submit. So space is precious. Again, it all depends on where you are in the situation. If you're hurting for space, maybe this is something where you can address the shortcomings in the letter of recommendation. But if not, you can put it in those essays that you have as a way to sort of address any issues with your application, like maybe like a bad grade or something, or like a poor score or something like that. Another thing to note is that you have to ask them, these letter writers, if you can write a good or strong letter of recommendation, because a weak one will actually work against you. So something to be wary of. And letters of recommendation do not need to be program specific. What I mean by that is that the professor can basically send this out to anyone, provided they don't do university specific references, such as for instance, the professor would have to keep it sort of generalized to whom they're addressing things. So they can't say, to the admissions committee of Purdue University, and they somehow send it to say Rice University. The letter writers aren't going to do that, but basically they're able to send the same letter to every institution in a sense. So they're not going to have to write multiple letters for you. And I'll turn it over to Jake here to discuss the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Alejandro. So yeah, I'm going to jump in and kind of give some tips on obtaining letters of recommendation, because I think that's one of the harder parts. Since this isn't something you're writing, this is something someone else is writing. Recommendation on people to ask. If you have a principal investigator, which is also known as a PI for short, those are the individuals who are in charge of your lab group. They should be top on your list if you've already done research. If you've taken professors that have advanced courses, like upper level courses, junior, senior level courses, they may be next up. And then potentially you can also ask an employer in a job related to your field. So let's say you worked in a lab, you were paid to work in that lab, and they're able to comment on your lab experience. Obviously, this is very centric to a lab, or a lab example, but it could be any example, right? If you're a math major, anywhere where you're having to use advanced mathematics in a job, you can also ask your boss for a letter right there. Be sure to ask them early on. I know it says several weeks in advance. I would recommend asking even sooner than that. I personally asked for my letters, I think at the beginning of October, and the applications are due in December, because that's going to give the professors enough notice, and you will have to poke them, however. In person or through email is fine. I've found personally that most professors prefer email because they want to limit how many students are just showing up at their office. Explain your situation and be sure, like Alejandro mentioned earlier, to stress if they can write a strong letter of recommendation. Letters of recommendation can make or break your application. So they need to choose individuals who can write strong letters. Be sure you also provide them your CV as well as your resume if required as reference, and also give them a list of application deadlines. And I did kind of touch on this, but you will have to check up and probably remind them of deadlines. Professors, let's be real, everyone can have a tendency to wait to the last minute, and professors who are writing these or individuals who are writing these are going to be the same. We're only human. So you will have to remind them of these deadlines as they come. So move on to the next slide. Okay, resumes. Some programs may also require a resume, and even if they don't, it's always good to have one, especially if you're going to be applying for jobs. They are typically short, about a page, and they should be very, very specific. They're going to detail your education, right? Probably going to include your degree, your school, your GPA, and what date you graduated, any relevant experience you have to the job, any skills you have related to the job, as well as any awards you received while in college or in another position. They need to be very clear. They need to be very concise. Like I said, they're usually only about a page. Typically, black and white PDFs are fine. I think especially in STEM, ours are pretty bare bones, straight and to the point. Other fields have, especially like graphic design, for example, I know they like to be a little more showy with theirs, but in STEM, we have very clear and concise resumes. They should have dates. You should be consistent with formatting, and you should definitely list your email. And for the program you're applying to, they might have guidelines on how to build the resume. Be sure to follow those as well. I believe the next slide is an example resume. Yes. So the next slide is Alejandro's example resume from 2018. We'll pause here for a little bit in case anyone's watching the video, later date, and wants to take a picture. Okay, I think it's enough time. We can go and move on. CVs. So CV is, probably butcher the second word, but curriculum vitae, I believe is how you say the second word. It's Latin. CVs are shortened to CV, and they are Latin for the course of life. There are no page limits for CVs. So like if you ever go to a professor's website and look at their CVs, especially one that's been with a university for a very long time, those things are usually like 30, 40, 50 pages. They get long. Typically used in academia. You find them more in academia. So when you're applying for grad school, you will be required to submit a CV. And they are loosely viewed as an extended resume. So it's basically everything you've ever done in your career. So it's going to be a summary of your career, your education, your qualifications, your experiences, research projects and contributions, publications as well. Their formatting is going to be very dependent on field. I have a friend who is an ecologist, and his CV formatting is different than mine. Again, I'm a biochemist. I'm not sure about Alejandro's. I think we probably have pretty similar structures, but it is going to be very dependent on the field as well. And you should definitely consult with your mentor, either as the mentor in the program, since they're typically in the same field as you, or even a professor that you know very well in your field. So let's go move on to the next slide. And this is an example of a CV. And this is Alejandro's CV from 2018, I'm guessing. No, it looks like 2020. So this is Alejandro's CV. You can see it's about 3 pages. I would say if you're applying to grad schools, your CV might not be a little more than a page, especially if you're pretty early on. So don't be worried if you only have like a page to a page and a half. Once you get further into your career, your CV starts to get longer and longer. So you can see on, well, we won't go into detail in the essence of time, but if you want, we can pause here so you can take a picture. Okay, and before we move on, I do want to point something out because it wasn't discussed in the last slide. I think it's also very important if you do presentations at conferences especially, those should go on CVs. Graduate schools like to see that you've attended conferences and have presented at conferences. That's a big boon to your applications. All right, let's go and move on to the next one. Okay, the GRE. So for those who don't know, the GRE is basically a standardized test for college graduates, or graduates for bachelor's. After I would say your last year, typically you take this test, and it covers very basic general information. So there is a writing section, there's a verbal reading section, and an analytical writing section. The verbal reasoning section is typically English, literature, vocabulary, that sort of things. Quantitative reasoning is very math based. Analytical writing is, as it sounds, it's essay answering. It's writing and answering essays. And you can see on the right, this is an example of just some random person's GRE scores. You can see the verbal reasoning, they give you percentile breakdowns, same thing with quantum reasoning quantitative reasoning and analytical writing. And you can typically send these to multiple schools, which I'll discuss in a second. All right. Some programs require a GRE, some do not. So it's very important to take a look at what programs you're applying to and see if they actually require the GRE, specifically also if they require program-specific GREs, because there is a physics GRE, there is a chemistry GRE. Some may list them as optional. When I applied to UH, for example, they did not require the GRE for my program. It was optional. I could still include my scores, but they said that they will not be taken into consideration. I'm guessing they don't even look at them. ETS, which is the company that runs the GRE setup, allows you to send the GRE scores to 4 institutions for free. So it would be good to know who you're applying to when you get there, because after you finish the test, you can go ahead and send those out. More is extra. Scores are good for about 5 years. So you can, if you do very well in the first time, you can send those scores out. And for about a 5-year period, you can also retake this multiple times, and you can send whatever your highest test score is. Each school has an ETS code that you can use. And if the program doesn't list anything about GRE, it's good to potentially reach out to the admissions office. There is a URL included here. This URL here actually lists programs, I believe, for STEM programs and humanities programs actually do and don't require the GRE. So that is also a resource you can use to figure out if your program requires a GRE. Transcripts. So transcripts, every program is going to ask you for transcripts. Typically, from what I have seen in the programs I've applied to, you can upload unofficial transcripts. However, you will eventually be required to send official transcripts. So if you can get an unofficial transcript for yourself for a PDF, you can submit those to your application. And then if you're accepted, they'll typically say, we need you to send us an official transcript by this date. That could be very program specific though. So be sure you check on all the information in the applications. These transcripts are going to showcase your entire educational career, unless they're stated otherwise. You can access your unofficial transcript through My UH, and you may need to fill out a coursework form, which is basically a form that lists every class you've taken, as well as your grade, what you've received. And these are going to be relevant courses towards your degree, and they will typically include cumulative and major GPA. So cumulative GPA is going to be every single class you've taken, whereas major GPA, for example, if you're a math major, is likely going to only include math classes. If you're a bio major, is only going to include bio and chemistry, et cetera, et cetera. All right, let's go and move on to the next slide. Application fee waivers, they do exist because application fees can get very expensive. Harvard, for example, I know off the top of my head is $200 to apply. UH was, I think, 50 or 60. So they can get very pricey very fast. Fee waivers are offered at some institutions. They are not well advertised. Some are need basis. So you need to make sure you fit in the criteria. And you typically have to contact the programs and ask to receive these application fee waivers. Some programs offer fee waivers at national conferences. One example is the National SACNAS conference offers fee waivers for many programs. I know Larissa attained, I think, 3 or 4 fee waivers at the Digital SACNAS conference last year, and one of them was Harvard. So she was able to get a lot of her fees waived. Very useful, and definitely take advantage of it if you can, because these will add up very fast to be very expensive. Some scholarship programs also offer fee waivers. I don't know these very well, but 2 of them are the GEM Fellowship and the McNair Scholars Program. So if you are a member of any scholarship program, you might want to check to see if fee waivers are offered through them as well. So move on to the next one. The last tidbit, I think this is just general advice, and this is something I wish I would have known when I was doing applications, because I didn't do anything like this. Use a cloud service to organize your application materials. It's going to be very easy to get things mixed up, and you don't want to lose, let's say if your hard drive goes out, you do not want to lose all of these materials before you've submitted them. So things like Google Drive or Dropbox are good. It's also good to make sure you organize these through folders that are specific to the programs and the universities you are applying to, with their deadlines listed. That way you don't lose track of them. You do not want to submit application materials for the wrong university. It's going to be an automatic refusal. You're not going to get in. That actually happened to a student that I know at my undergrad. He was applying to, I believe it was University of Colorado, and he submitted application materials that all listed University of Arizona. Surprise, surprise, he did not hear a call back. He did get into University of Arizona, however. So make sure you have the profile folder that contains your CVs and resumes, the list of deadlines and schools, any research posters or presentations you've done, transcripts, and any additional materials needed to help your letter writers, because this is very good to share with your letter writers as well. That way they can look through all this material and craft better letters of recommendation for you. All right, let's go and move on to the last slide. I think this is going to be the closer. So I think we can end it here. Thank you for tuning in, guys. Appreciate you coming. Now, does anyone have any questions? So we can answer any questions you might have about all the application materials or all the information we've gone over. Well, if not, that's okay. You can always reach us. I think the next slide has our contact information. Correct, Alondra? Yep. So the next slide, you can see, you can always reach us on Discord. We're going to be very responsive on Discord, as we mentioned before. We have Facebook and the Instagram you can follow us at, as well as our Twitter. You should all also have our email. We will be responsive via email. So if you need to get a hold of us that way, or if you have any questions regarding contact with your mentor. Alejandro, do you want to take the meeting agenda? Kind of go over the next meeting?
Yeah, you could. So basically the next meeting, we're gonna invite some graduate students to come and talk about their experiences, and you can ask them questions on what it's been like so far, entering grad school, applying, their transition from undergraduate to graduate, and sort of how they survived, or sort of giving advice to the people who are trying to get into PhD programs. So with that, I will stop the recording.